Hi, my name is Christopher Raishun Marshall. I'm the playwright of Little Black Bear. And if you want to know more about my play and the event, Black Voices, please watch this video. When did I fall in love with theater? I think it was about, it's interesting because I think I fell in love with theater before I knew I fell in love with theater. My earliest memory of theater is I was in the third grade in my elementary school, and a traveling Shakespeare company came, and they performed Taming of the Shrew. And ironically, I didn't know like everything that was going on, but I could follow the story. And even though all the other third graders like, I don't know what the heck that was. Why do we have to watch that? But I was following the story, even though I didn't know everything that they were saying. And then in the third grade, I was sitting in our gym because we had one of those gyms that it's like the gym, and then there's the raised like stage, auditorium stage in it as well. And I sat there, and I remember in that moment I was like, I love this. I don't know what it is, but I love it. And I think after that I was like in and out. I was watching things on PBS, watching the Shakespeare performances on PBS. One of my favorite shows growing up was Are You Being Served? That I used to watch all the time on PBS. While other kids were watching cartoons and stuff, I was watching British television. And then, I finally went to college and tried to avoid the theater. And then finally, in my master's program, I ended up going to the theater. So I guess my first love started at the age or in third grade. Why did I have to be part of the theater world? It's funny. I I tried to avoid theater because stupid enough, my best friend wanted to be an actor. And I felt like I'm a Leo, and Leo loyalty. I felt like I didn't want to be the person who was like, I want to be an actor because you want to become an actor. I didn't want to be. I remember watching. It's stupid, but I remember watching an episode of The Fresh Prince, and it was the episode where his best friend came in and wanted to be a comedian, and then he got up and was like, well, I can do comedy too, and he did a stand up, and it was or he did comedy, and it was funny, but then he just decided, I'm going to be a comedian now, even though you worked hard at this. And then he stood up in front of the audience and he said some jokes. Will Smith said some jokes, and then everyone booed him off the stage. And his friend was like, see, it's not as easy as you thought it was. And I just never wanted that situation to happen because I knew my best friend loved acting. And I was like, well, I don't want to step up and try to do it because you like it. But eventually, so I tried to do dance and I tried to do music. But everyone kept saying that I had like a knack for the theater, that I should go into theater. And I just didn't want to do it because of my best friend. And then he gave me his blessing. He was like, don't hold back because of me, do it. And he ended up not doing it. He ended up going into something else. But I took a theater class, and in the class, the teacher, Sarah Brown, said, imagine your life now that you have acting in it or theater in it, and how would you feel if I came and told you in this moment you can never do theater or never go to the theater again? And for the first time in my life, when she said that, something broke inside of me, and I just like cried. And I was in class and I was crying, and I don't know if anyone knew why I was crying, but just the thought of not having theater or not having acting in my life made me cry. And that's why I realized that I just have to be in it, regardless of, what else I have going on, regardless of what my life may bring, regardless of what career path may pop up. It has to be with acting or within the theater. When did I fall in love with writing? It's funny you say, when did it go from an interest to an obsession? Because ironically, writing has just been one of those talents I've always had, I guess. I've never taken any like formal instructional classes on it, besides like a high school creative writing course where we would write poems and like one-page short stories and things like that. But In my college program, I was one of maybe about 50-ish Black people, and there were a lot of people in the program. And so when you're a token in the program, you obviously know about the tokens, but when you're a token in the program, like, you and the other Black people get picked for everything. And if there's four of you, the four of you get cast in everything, and all the other Black people just spend 4 years getting a theater degree without doing any main stage productions. And so I was in an African diaspora class, um, and I was reading some of the stories, and reading our textbook, and I learned about the Orishas, the African gods, and how they play a major role in a lot of Black stories, especially in the Black arts movement. And I was so fascinated by the Orishas. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna tell us an Orisha story to give Black people at my school an opportunity to perform in something other than like little student-led projects. And so I wrote a play based on the information that I got from class, gave it to my professor, who was the only Black professor that we had, gave it to my professor so that he could read it and tell me, what he thought about it. And, I'd never written a play before. So in my mind, I'm like, this is going to suck. He's going to rip it apart, probably not going to get anywhere. And then for like a month or so, I didn't hear back from him. I kept going to him and asking him. He's like, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. And then I showed up in his office one day, and he presents me a plaque. He actually read my play the day that I gave it to him, submitted it to the National Association of Dramatic and Speech Arts for their playwriting competition. They were taking submissions from all around the country. And out of all the submissions, I think it was more than 2,000 submissions, I won the festival. And I got the plaque, the little superior plaque and everything. And I was like completely surprised. And he was like, oh, you won money as well, but I'm keeping that because I put my money into submitting it. I was like, okay, that's fine. I didn't expect it to be, but that was my first time writing like a play. And then I stepped away from it for a while. And then ironically enough, like 4 or 5 years ago, I was in a writer's group as an actor. And I was always giving feedback because I was like, I don't like this. I don't like that. I think this will be better if this. And then another actress, out of spite, was like, well, since you're so critical of everyone else's works, why don't you write something and bring it so we can tear it apart as well? So I did. But instead of tearing it apart, they loved it. And so week to week, I started bringing things. And I started I think it became an obsession because I'd write something and I think it was great, and I brought it, and they thought it was great, but then I'd take a week or two and I'd look at it again. I'm like, I don't know why I wrote this, and I don't know why anyone liked it. It was crap. Let me scratch this and rewrite it again. So I got obsessed with like writing and rewriting, and I still do obsess about writing and rewriting and like improving stories. And then I started winning, more awards, getting in festivals. I was in the top 30 out of 850 writers for Samuel French in 2018. And that same year, I won the sex themed festival at the Players Theater. And I had a monologue published in the 50 Best Monologues for Women. And I have another short play that's being published in a 50 Best American Short Plays anthology. So, and then I started also getting work for my writing. So I was like, oh, well, keep doing it. You know what I mean? It's doing well, so keep doing it. Why do I like the playwriting format as a writer and an actor? It's interesting. It's not about the format for me, I suppose, because I do write both plays and films. It's about the story. As an actor, I believe that you're a detective and a psychologist and a healer and like all of these things all wrapped in one. A storyteller, you're a historian. You have all these jobs that you have to do as an actor, and the same thing is almost true for a writer as well. And I found personally that the more I developed as an actor, the more I understood writing. And the more I developed as a writer, the better I got as an actor. So they started kind of feeding each other. As far as the format itself, I used to use published play format where it's like the name and then the colon and then the line, with no spaces in between. I used to just copy the formats that I saw, and then people were like, "Well, that's not what people write in. That's what people publish in." And I was like, "Okay." So then I switched to I switched to the more writing format because I bought Writer's Duet, and it kind of puts it in the format for you. So for me, it's less about the formatting and more about the storytelling. And I just kind of like cheat and use software like Writer's Duet to do the formatting for me. How do I come up with a play idea and from start to finish? I could be asleep one day or taking a walk. It's so funny. It's like I can't really pinpoint. It's random things pop. My mind works I think my mind works. My mind has ADD when the rest of my body doesn't. So my mind and people always used to like get onto me for this because I'll be in the middle of talking about something and then all of a sudden my mind will take a left turn, and then I'd be over here and they're like, wait, I'm lost. Can you go back? And I think my mind works in this weird way that it just thinks a lot of things at one time. And I could be doing anything and a story idea will pop up. I remember one of my most successful stories happened because I was listening to Mozart's Lacrimosa from his Requiem. And I had it on repeat because it's one of my favorite classical songs. And then all of a sudden, this whole play just like the Big Bang exploded in my mind. And I just pulled out my laptop and started writing. And then it went on to Samuel French, and now it's getting published in an anthology. And, it's like, though, as for me, any little thing, I could be reading an article about someone or something on the internet, or I could be watching a YouTube video of something, and something even small. You could be doing a YouTube video about a judge in a courtroom settling divorce, like a divorce court kind of show, like judge settling divorce cases, and the story that one of the people getting a divorce says, something from that sparks an idea, and I've written another play about it. But I try to always, I think what makes my plays so personal, and sorry, it's like this little fly flying around. I think what makes my plays so personal is that no matter what I write about, I always try to bring my culture and myself to the work. I have a unique voice, and I try to always tell that voice through the work. So nothing becomes generic or just like every other story. When did I hear about EAG, and why do I want to work with that organization? So I was a guest. One of my partners, a co-writer, John L. Peacock, he and I are partnered on a writers project that we got hired to do from Munich in Munich, Germany. And we finished it, and we're just like editing and everything. But he invited me to this weekly reading that he does, and this particular week he usually does one playwright and like a full-length play. This particular week it was like 5 or 6 playwrights, and they were all doing short pieces. And this lady and the guy, this older lady and this younger man, both members of EAG, the Episcopal Actors Guild, were talking to another writer, because I was just a guest. And they were talking to another writer about his piece, and they're like, "Oh, you should bring this piece to the Episcopal Actors Guild, blah blah blah." And they love to do series on Black artists and blah blah blah. And I was like, well, I want to submit something to the Episcopal Actors Guild, but I didn't. And then, like kismet, about a month and a half later, I'm on Facebook, and then I'm in a lot of different, actor and writer groups, and I see a submission notice from EAG asking for Black writers to submit projects for this upcoming event they have called Black Voices. And so I submitted my piece, Little Black Bear, and he said he was going to get back to me in like 3 days. And then actually about 20-30 minutes later, he got back to me. He was like, I love the piece. I want the piece to be in the festival. And I was like, I'd love to. So, and it went from there. Little Black Bear is a very dear and near and a piece that's near and dear to my heart, because I am an American Indian. Some people choose to say Native American. I have a lot of different. I have a lot of culture in my background, but I grew up understanding and knowing that we were Choctaw. Primarily because I grew up sort of around my Choctaw family and going to family reunions, powwows, seeing my family, and knowing this is my culture. And it was very good and powerful just having that culture. I didn't think about it at the time, but it was just powerful having that culture be around me and understand that I was Choctaw, even though I didn't look quite like everybody in my family. But the problem is that I'd go to school, and then all of a sudden, and I tell people, "Oh, I'm Choctaw. We had this family reunion, and I got to, hang out with my cousins." And they'd be like, "You're not Indian. You're Black. You're African." And I would get picked on for saying that I was a Choctaw Indian, and I'm like, "Oh, well, why can't I be Choctaw? That's what I am." And they're like, "No, you're not." So I used to get picked on by that a lot, and so at some point along the line, I started to hide from my own identity and just claim African or African American, because that's what people identified me as. And that's the thing that would get me picked on the least, or the least, picked on the least. And it became this thing. I didn't realize it was a point of trauma for me until I did Shakespeare and Company this year, the month-long intensive. And that's New York sounds you hear in the background, police sirens. So anyone seeing the interview, I'm in New York. No, but I at Shakespeare and Company, I thought other issues that I had in my life would be the triggers and the traumas that I would need to release. And I released those pretty quick, but there was the funny thing about trauma is, if let's say you have 5 traumas, the 5 major traumas, you won't really pay attention to number 5 if 1, 2, 3, and 4 are like super big. But then when you work through 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4, all of a sudden you realize that there was a 5th trauma there the whole time. And sometimes it might have been your biggest trauma, but it was more subtle than the others. And so I think that's what happened. I thought all the other issues that I had were the real issue. But once I worked through those, I realized that the real trauma was the fact that as a little boy, I knew myself to be, a Black Choctaw Indian. And people in my school was like, "You're not Black, you're not Choctaw, you're African." And that actually created a big trauma for me that I didn't know about. And when I released it, I wanted to tell a story that was, I guess, representative of who I am. And so I did, me and my mom and my aunts all got on ancestry.com, and we went back and we found so much information about our family, so many wonderful things. One thing is that our ancestry goes back to like 1384 Wales with a crest and all, like family crest and all of that. Our family used to own a castle called Coedy Castle in Glamorgan, Wales. That's on one side, obviously, but I found out so much information about some of my Indian ancestors who that I didn't know about. Like, one beautiful thing was that that I had an ancestor who they named Mary because they couldn't say her real name, and she was part of the Namkeg tribe, but she had 2 children by this Welsh settler named Nathaniel. And Nathaniel died pretty young, and according to the records, he might have died because he had had two children with an Indian woman. But she lived to what there's one record says she lives to 100, she lived to 107. The other record said she died at 96. But either way, she lived a long and beautiful life. And it was just so much information that I found out. But one thing that I really discovered was that in the 1800s, there were a lot of, the census started in August 2nd, which is my birthday, 1790. But in the 1870s-ish, they created this census specifically for minorities. And in the census they created only had 4 categories: Negro, mulatto, Negro slave, or mulatto slave. And it was a tool that they used to identify, so essentially, this was before the Dawes Act came out in 1887, but it was a tool that was essentially used to force Indians to identify as Negroes or mulattoes, because the land inherently belonged to us. But if you are no longer considered an Indian, you don't have the claim to the land that the Indians had. And so it was like a political thing, or a little, I don't know what the correct word was, but it was like a clandestine operation to basically force Indians to either identify as not Indian and keep their land, but pay taxes on it to, the white people who owned the land, who now own the land. Or if you didn't claim, or if you did claim Indian, what we later discovered was that they built these reservations and forced them on it. Do you know what I mean? That happened later, but it was based off of these censuses that were given out. And so I based my story around my third great grandmother, Minerva, and also Elizal, and how they in the 1870s lived as 2 Choctaw Indians, one dark skin like me, one light skin, one mulatto, could pass for white, and how they were faced with that same choice. A white man comes to their door and says, you either take this deal and claim Negro and mulatto, or you continue to be what you are, and then you'll get the consequences later. And I just felt like I got all this information through, research and family, research, and looking through our family records and the historical records on our family. But that's just it was just a story that isn't being told. When we think about slavery and things like that, we just think about the settlers and the Africans, which obviously some of my blood is of African descent as well, but a lot of my blood is of Indian descent. Do you know what I mean? And so one big struggle that I've had, and one thing that I've been fighting for as an individual, is I don't like to be identified as an African American, because I know a lot of people feel very comfortable like, my friend who's African American. I'm like, but by saying that, you are negating everything that makes me who I am. You're putting me in a category of people by labeling me with Africa, which I love Africans. I think Africans are some of the most beautiful people in the world, but I don't know any Africans. I don't know any Africans in my family. All I know are Indians and like American Black people. Do you know what I mean? I don't know anyone from Africa. I can't name one. Well, there's one person in my family that I know is from Africa, but she's not blood relation. She married one of my Indian cousins, and they're together, and she's from Nigeria, but she married into the family. The family itself, I've known, have always been like white people, Indian people, and just like regular, not regular, but, American Black people. And I always felt offended when people call, and I noticed, if you notice, like a lot of Black people don't like to be called African Americans. We don't call each other African American. And I mean, some do, but a lot of us don't. And I think, or at least from my experience, a lot of people that I know, we prefer to just be, because I think another, sorry, this answer is going on really long, but one thing about that is, did you know historically every name for Black people that we've had from the N word, from Negro, from colored, to African American, are all names that was given to us by white people to make themselves comfortable. The only name that Black people ever, I would say, ever really at least claimed was during the Black Arts Movement, when and Black Power movement, Black Arts Movement, when James Brown said, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." Then they started groups like the Black Panthers. You know, we became Black people. Everyone became proud to be Black, and there's Black Power. All that was from us taking this name and saying, "This is our identity. This is who we are." Because a lot of us aren't African. A lot of us aren't a lot of us didn't come from Africa. A lot of us don't know people from Africa. A lot of us might have ancestry from Africa, but we have ancestry from other places too. And to call us one is negating all the rest. And so I think, to sum all that up, I feel like this story was very important because it was to show a story that no one really hears. It was to put out information about slavery that existed. The Indians were there as well. Slavery wasn't just white people and Africans. The Indians were there as well. The Indians were the ones who had our lands taken from us. We were the ones who were put in slavery as well. We were the ones who, there were some who became slave owners. There were some who were massacred. We were all our stories were in that as well as my African side. Our stories were in that as well. But when you think of slavery, you hear African and white. And you hear about the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to here, but you don't hear about my ancestors who were already on this land for 4,000 to 8,000 years before Africans were ever even brought over here. So I felt like that was why I wrote this story. So the main story arc of Little Black Bear is two of my ancestors, Elizel and Minerva. They're married. Minerva's pregnant. They have a land and a farm, and they have sharecroppers that work for them. Black sharecropper or Negro sharecroppers that work for them. And Minerva is upset with Elizel, because she gets this letter, or he gets a letter that she reads that says that he's about to accept the deal from this white man who's supposed to come over later. They essentially get into a debate or an argument about what this deal is, and the white man shows up, and the deal is he's allowing Elizel to keep the land, keep his 600 acres of land, provided that he pay taxes on it, pending that he take a census. And in the census, it's a census that's basically erasing his identity as an Indian, or as an American Indian. He has to identify with Negro. His wife has to identify with mulatto in order for them to. It's like a test, and they're giving you the answer. Like, you have to say Negro, you have to say mulatto if you want to keep everything. And it's really about a complex tension between the wife and the husband, because he wants to accept the change or the time or whatever, accept this role as a Negro in order to protect and save his future, his family. He wants his children and his children's children to grow up on this land that was given to him by his father and his father's father. His wife, Minerva, wants him to man up and be that Choctaw warrior that she knows that he can be, and stand up to the white people and fight. So they're both, it's really an interesting argument over the pride of the Choctaw. Like, should you stand up and fight for what belongs to us, knowing full well that you more than likely are going to lose everything and be forced on a reservation? Or should you comply for the salvation of your future generations? So that's essentially the play in a nutshell. One actor is a really, 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 like one of my best friends, Ryan Sett. He is, I've known Ryan from when he was like fairly new at acting and seen him grow into this point. And he knows my work so well that no matter what role I put him in, he's going to bring what's needed to the role. He has the work that he does and just his overall temperament is so perfect for the role of Eliza, because it's almost that he's a man, but he's also kind of soft-spoken. But then when he needs to be like a man, as we say, a man, he can he can man up a bit, if that's kosher to say. But he he has that very well, where Ryan himself likes to be not passive, but he likes to allow the possibility for all answers and all solutions without trying to create conflict. And I think that's perfect for the role of Eliza, because Eliza is trying to figure out the best solution with the least resistance. And I think Ryan's natural temperament works well for that. And Minerva, she's just that fiery, strong, woman like I've seen in my family. And she's being played by Tiffany Taylor, who is, I believe, a mulatto woman. And so she has obviously that look, but she just the bite that she brings. I told her to make sure that even with the bite, the love is still there, and you can feel it. It feels very palpable between the two. Like, you could tell the love is there, even though they have opposing viewpoints. And then Maurice Kessler is playing Mark Heron. Funny thing, he's a Jewish guy from the North. And when I offered him the role, he's like, is it okay for a Jewish guy from the North to be playing this Southern white racist guy? I was like, it's fine. You did well when I heard you read it before. I'd love to have you do it now. And he's just giving so much. There's a quiet, powerful force with him. There's that moment. There's that, because racism doesn't have to be overt and yelling out slurs and stuff like that. It could be quiet and with a look. It could be the tone of how you say a certain thing, not tone being like elevated, but even if it's like very straight tone and very matter of fact, you can feel and hear the intention behind it. And he captures the danger of Mark Heron so well. And I know people have asked, well, if he's a white man in the South in this time period, why does he let this happen? Why does he let that happen? Because you have to think about it. He might be a white man in the South, but he's not a white man in charge. He's a foot soldier doing what his boss told him to do, and that was to get this census taken. So he's not going to do anything against that. So he does have the conflict even of him being offended by these Choctaw Indians who he feels are less than them, offering them this land that he probably wants for himself, but having to do all this because his boss says so. There's going to be bite behind it, but it doesn't have to be raw in your face racism like everybody else. Do you know what I mean? I think this is a great cast, and all the like underlying tensions that they bring to the story just elevate it so much more. What do I want the audience to get out of this play? A lot. One, I want them to see that, like I said before, there are stories that are not just black and white. There are stories that there are other, what I think, because of the film industry and just through education and things like that, we forget that there were other people on this planet besides Africans and Europeans during slavery. China still existed, Japan still existed, the Philippines still existed. Everyone was having their own fights and their own issues and their own oppression, but the American Indians existed too. We were already here before slavery was ever started. Like the Choctaw According to the research that I had done, the Choctaw had been here for 4,000 to 8,000 years before slavery ever even stepped foot on, like slavery ever even happened. So, but the problem is that because we talk about slavery, we only talk about Africans being brought over from Africa, beaten, lynched, whipped, and forced to pick cotton and stuff like that. There were a lot more stories happening. And this isn't necessarily a slavery story because I don't personally like to write slavery stories, but this is a story that happened during the time of slavery. And I want people to understand, one, I want the audience to see that these are my people too. I want the audience to see that not only are these my people, but Native lives matter just as much as anybody else. We're constantly in this country fighting about equality and being proper and what's okay to say and what's not okay to say, and not offending this person, not offending that person. But the biggest offense of all is that they took this land from, essentially from my ancestors. And no one still really addresses that. And I think this will be a beautiful start to many more stories, hopefully, from me, and maybe inspire other people who also have Native ancestry to tell their stories. Like I said, I always try to put a little bit of me into my stories. And I looked at some records and I've created this story off of the records that I looked at. But hopefully this will open people's eyes to the fact that our story exists as well. And by our story, I don't mean African. Because yes, a certain percentage of my blood is African, but I'm talking about my American Indian blood. That story exists as well. And we have to start treating it as such. I had someone, an actress, like, this is a bit off topic, but it isn't. One night I posted a bunch of photos from the 1800s to show that American Indians and a lot of tribes, especially Southern tribes, looked like me or darker than me on a regular basis. And that this modern Hollywood image of what they consider a Native American to be this European looking person who, ethnically ambiguous. Yes, there are some that look like that. I have cousins that look like that, but there are a lot that look like me too. I have one of the most striking things I remember from going to one of my family reunions was seeing a younger cousin of mine. He might have been like 12 or 13 at the time. He was completely dark, like he was completely dark, like just skin was dark. And yet he had long, straight, dark, beautiful, smoky hair that went all the way down to his thighs. And he looked like everyone else. He was just dark. And I was like, this is what people need to see. And I hope people get that as well. But I posted this Facebook post about showing dark-skinned natives and dark-skinned Indians from different tribes. And I was telling them, I said on the post, don't identify me as not being an American Indian because you think I look like something else. And then someone responded, all Black people have some bit of Indian in them. It doesn't change the fact that they're Black or they're African or something like that. And I was like, but you are the very person that I am fighting against in this situation, because you are negating the part of me that is, to tell me that I'm not, because I have to identify with what you feel comfortable identifying me as. You feel comfortable identifying me as African American because it fits your movement. So I have to identify as African American because you tell me. You're like, forget the fact that you're Choctaw, forget all that. You're still African, and I won't stand for that. And I made a vow to myself that I will never, from this day forward. I made a vow in January that from this day forward I would never identify myself as an African American ever again, because I'm not. And I want this story to inspire the audience, for the Black people in the audience who might have multiple cultures in that background, to let them to identify. Yes, it's great to have that African pride of your African ancestry, but have pride for your other ancestry as well. Don't negate this because of that. And that's kind of what I ultimately hope the story brings out in people. And also the opportunity to educate people who don't know about this so that they can move forward, making better decisions about how to approach people of different ethnic backgrounds. What am I looking forward to watch with the Black Voices event? I'm looking forward to watch Little Black Bear and to see how the audience receives it. But it looks like there's only 3 of us who are performing that evening. I don't know if there's a talk back after that, but I'm also looking forward to seeing other people's stories, because every artist, whether actor, writer, musician, their art is always different from the next person because they're coming from their own experiences, and seeing other people's perspectives and sharing mine and just seeing how people receive that. Am I looking forward to see this in the future as a play or a short film? Yeah, I'm looking forward to all of it. I don't like to limit myself. I know there's some artists who's like, oh, I'm a playwright, period. And that's great. And then you have people who feel like they're a film writer. And you have those who are very extreme, like, oh, we don't write screenplays, we write plays, or vice versa. But I feel like, a story is a story. And I actually had this one writer tell me that if someone tells you this would be better as a film, that's an insult, not a compliment. And I'm like, maybe for you, but for me, it's a compliment. Because what that means for me is that if I do it as a film and it's successful, way more people will be able to see my film than will be able to see it as a play. You do a play, unless you become a famous playwright, you do a play and who's going to see it? Maybe 50 people in this theater, 150 in that theater. If you get it to the Broadway level, maybe 500 or more people will see it a night. But those people will pretty much still be local to the area. By the time you get it to a Broadway theater, it'll be famous anyway. You know what I mean? Or semi-famous at least. But if you do it as a film and you put it in festivals, it could go on indie flicks. It could go, it could turn into something that becomes a special. I think that turning it into a film, putting it on social media, putting it on YouTube, putting it on my website, putting it in festivals so that a lot of more people will see it is probably where I want to go with it. Why more voices of the community should be heard in the theater world? Well, I think this country is founded and tried and true on racism and prejudice. And I think that if you think about the history of the theater in America, in the 1800s, Edward P. Christie created the Christie Minstrels. It became real famous, where he basically had over 150 minstrel houses that made fun of Black people. And he got paid. He became rich off of that, and Black people got nothing, didn't get any money. It was about, and that's why blackface is so looked down on. People sometimes don't even know the history of that. They just like, oh, blackface, I'm offended, but they don't know why they really should be offended. The offense of blackface is because Edward P. Christie used to have white actors go on these plantations, study African slaves or Black slaves on the plantation, and then paint their face and recreate that on the stage. And he made what would be considered today billions of dollars doing that. He was obviously powerful enough to create 150 minstrel houses around the country that are now, ironically, some of these Lord theaters and Broadway theaters used to be minstrel houses that was created by Edward P. Christie that they repurposed into like Broadway. But and then after that, you saw in the theater, other than people like Paul Robeson, who were the exception, Black people weren't allowed in the theater. George Godfrey was this boxer who ended up losing in his boxing career and he was a black boxer. He lost his boxing career. That's what the Germany play is about. And then he went on to Paramount Pictures, and for 5 films, he was a servant, a slave, a field hand, a black extra. And then in the 6th film, he played a boxer in a film. I don't know how big or small the role was, but at least it was something other than a slave or a field hand or a servant. But for a long time, you had Black people being represented as just this. Minorities being, the industry was impossible for Black people to get in. And if you got in it, you got in knowing that you were going to be a slave or a servant or a maid. And then in the 70s, Black people started creating their own film industry. It was blaxploitation films. And that was kind of our way of having our own thing. You won't let us in, we'll create our own thing. And then after that, the Cosby Show happened in the 80s, and then Fresh Prince. And so you started seeing Black people on TV more. But if you look at those 80s and 90s shows, and even the early 2000s, if there were Black people on a show, or like Black people that were the stars of a show, the whole show was Black. If you look on Netflix now, a lot of those shows like Girlfriends, Half and Half, One on One, all The Game, all of those shows that came out around that time typically had very few, if any, white people, or it was like all Black. And not saying that was a problem, but that's a problem in the sense that when you flip and look on the other side, you saw these white shows where there were a Black person who might have come in for a guest star appearance or had a small role on a small recurring role here and there. But the industry was very shut off to minorities for a while. And that was for the Blacks, and for the Chinese and the Spanish and Hispanic and Latinos and everyone else, it was even worse. And so I feel like this is a great time in history because we had Barack Obama, the first Black president. Now we have Kamala Harris, the first Black vice president. Black people are starting to show that we are coming out in these positions of power and these positions that we're not the stereotype that people think of us. Do you know that New York is just happening, but do you know that like people, like there's this art, people always talk about, like I've been hearing people since Trump was in office saying, just send all the Black people to Africa. Well, first of all, not all of us are from Africa. Most of us are from America. We were born and raised here. But they, like send them back to Africa because they're criminals, they're this, they're degenerate. But 90% of the stuff that people are using right now, they probably don't realize was invented by Black people. The stoplight was invented by a Black man. Do you see what I'm saying? A lot of things that people take for granted were invented by Black people, but they weren't. But no one gives the Black people credit for that. Stories like Hamilton, which I have not seen. I have not seen Hamilton. I kind of have avoided seeing Hamilton. But Black stories, period, other than like just slave play and Hamilton, need to be told more. I was in a discussion earlier this year where a white guy actually stood up and was like, well, I haven't read Black stories or supported Black theater because I didn't know that there were roles in it for me. First of all, there are almost never roles in white theater for Black people, but we still come and see it. We still support it. So that's a crock of, bull. But second of all, Black writers aren't like white writers in the sense that in Black theater, if you look through the Black arts movement, you look through Black theater from the 60s up to now, you will often find that in a lot of Black plays or a lot of Black plays written by Black people, there are white characters. There are roles for white people. But on the opposite end, I've been in college. I've had auditions where they would say, no need for any for the black people in the theater to audition for this piece. Or I look on Actors Access or Backstage, and you see the breakdown, and it's like Caucasian, 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 Caucasian. You know what I mean? There's a deliberate effort to keep black people out of white stories, but black people are inclusive of white people in black stories. And I think that putting more black stories out there and also making it equivalent in the sense of like representation and viewership of these white stories will, one, it'll solve the issue of like feeling like you have to put black people in your stories, or why black people aren't getting work. Because if we got work that's just as good, we don't need to be in your stories. Not saying that as a, you know what I mean? We don't have to fight to be in your stories if you're allowing our stories to be told. But not everything can be top dog, underdog, racing in the sun. You know what I mean? Like there are way more stories. Like there is actually people who don't realize that there are thousands of black stories written by famous and probably millions, if you think about the people who are not famous, playwrights and writers. And people won't even take the time to look at it or read it. And they're great stories. And I think putting more stories out there, to answer your question, will allow those stories to be seen. Lovecraft Country is one of the best shows in the world I've seen. And it's a black story. And this is what happens when you show black stories. You see beauty, you see culture, and you see things, you see ideas that you probably wouldn't have expected to see, because they go out of the norm that we don't get to see because people don't put it out there. And I think putting more, normalizing minority stories and minority writing is a step towards diversity and multiculturalism in this country. Because even though Separate but Equal is supposed to be done with, it's still kind of like that. Do you know what I mean? If you think about it, if you look at most all white theaters or predominantly white theaters and look at their lineup, they're always doing like top dog, underdog, or Raisin in the Sun, or maybe Once on This Island, or Smokey Joe's Cafe is their musical. They always have one of each of those, and it's every year. That's the black. Sorry, this fly is really. That's the black show. They do this black show, and that's their black. That's what they consider diversity. It's like, oh, even in college, like my play, the play that I told you won the National Playwriting Festival. It became the black show. That year they realized they didn't have a black show for the black people, and so they made my play the black show of the year, only because they didn't have one. If they had picked one out, it probably wouldn't have gotten performed on our campus, on our college, like it did. It got performed as the black show in the major theater with like, I think it was the Rose Theater, so it was like 950 seats or something like that for the whole for the whole campus and for people who were, from the community. And it was written down as their black show for the year. And the only time that a student's work became their black show. Otherwise, it was like always a black play, like Raisin in the Sun or something like that. And you see, that's what theaters do. That's what these white theaters do. I write for this this magazine called Brief Candle. A friend of mine runs that magazine, and it's a yearly magazine. And I always try to write stories that I'm passionate about. And it's a Shakespeare magazine. And so the last article I wrote, not this recent article, but the last article I wrote was called Far More Fair Than Black, which is an Othello line. And it talked about how white gatekeepers in Shakespeare white people are always talking about how there aren't minority. I've heard so many people say, oh, well, minorities don't really want to do Shakespeare. Black people we don't really see a lot of black people like wanting to do it. We don't have a lot of black people coming out to audition, blah, blah, blah. And that's their excuse for black people not being in Shakespeare. But I know a lot of black actors who do Shakespeare very well. I am one of them. In fact, one theater company was doing an article on 9 people who they think are some of the best black Shakespeare actors in the country, and they listed me as one of the 9. But even in the New York Shakespeare Theater, I go in and the gatekeepers stop me. I've actually had an audition one time for a show where the director, it was down to me and this white guy, and the director was like, I want to use you, but I don't want people to think I picked you because you were white. I mean, because you're not white, because you're black. And so, you know, it's funny because the gatekeepers keep us out, and that's what that piece was about. And the same thing within the theaters. These white theaters, they say they want to be diverse and they claim diversity, and then they do that one black show and one black musical. The black show in the fall, the black musical in the spring. And they want all the black people to get excited and hyped to go to those shows because that's the one black show. You can't audition for any of the other shows, or you can, but you probably won't get in. But come back for Smokey Joe's Cafe, come back for Raisin in the Sun. We can use you. And even then, they only use the same black people. So that's until they've aged out of that role, and then they find a new black person to put in that role for the next 5 or 10 years. That's just the reality. So I guess the long end, that to go back to your question, I think these black stories need to be told, and we need to normalize minorities, not just black, but Asian and Latino and people who are not white, just people who are not white. And also even within that spectrum, don't go by the stereotype of what a Latino or an Asian or a Native American looks like. There are American Indians, Native Americans that look just like me, and there are some that look like you. There are some that look in between. Same thing with Latinos. There are some that are black. There are some that are white, but they were born and raised in a Spanish-speaking country. And they're just as much the product of their environment and culture as anyone else. They're no more or less Latino because they're darker or lighter, but because we have an idea of what Latino should look like, or what Indian should look like, or what black should look like. Then when someone comes and they don't look like that idea, then it's like, oh no, you can't be this role. But I am an American Indian. Well, you can't be an Indian because you don't look like an Indian. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We need to normalize all of that. So these racial and color, barricades can be taken down, and it can be more normal for people. Like, you don't know how difficult it is trying to be. It's the saying in the black community that we got to work 3 times as hard to get half the credit. And it's true. We have to work 3 times as hard to get half the credit because we're not normalized. And I feel like people should normalize that. I had to talk to a group recently and let them know, stop writing, as a group of writers, and I let them know, stop writing stories about, not to the group, but just as a general thing for white people, to stop writing stories about black people being drug dealers and drug addicts and criminals and uneducated, because only 3% of black people have ever committed a crime. 3% of our community has ever committed crimes and have gone to jail. The rest of us are educated. The rest of us, and I'm not saying that if you commit a crime, you're not educated, because within that 3%, most of them might have been educated as well. But a lot of us are educated black people that you see every day. When you look at the news and you see a black neighborhood and you see that one black criminal, and you think, oh, all black people are like this one black criminal, that's ignorant and stupid, because he's probably in a neighborhood with thousands of black people. So if you look at that, it's just 1 out of 1,000 black people that's a criminal. 3% of our culture have committed crimes or have gone to jail for crimes. So why is it that every time I see a white person write a story about a black person, we're drug dealers, drug addicts, we come from broken homes, we're uneducated, we come from ghettos? I ain't never lived in a ghetto in my life. You know what I mean? Like I was raised in a nice family. I was raised with a mom who we have a nice house, and a lot of people in my family own businesses. A lot of people in my family are very connected. You see what I'm saying? I was raised myself to stay away from ghettos. We were like, we don't associate with that type of, we don't want to be associated with that type of energy. So, you know, want more for yourself, do more for yourself. So like, most of us don't fit in that category, but then so you go to the educated and the smart and the, you know, successful Black people who are actors and have them dumb themselves down to play these drug dealers because you think this is what Black community is. This is representing Black community. It's not. There are way more white drug dealers than there are Black drug dealers. There are way more people in trailer parks than there are white people in trailer parks than there are Black people in ghettos. There are way more. In fact, the largest number of people on welfare are poor, lower class white people. So why is it that you're writing these stories about Black people and saying this is representative of Black culture? It's not. Why is it that if a Black person is successful, they're automatically expected to be a famous rapper or you know, they got there because of sports or rap or something like that? Do you know what I mean? Like, I know plenty of Black doctors, plenty of Black lawyers, plenty of Black judges. I know all of them. I have some of them in my family. You see what I'm saying? And it's like, but no, Black people aren't smart enough to be doctors and lawyers and judges. They must have been lucky. Someone must have gave them a minority scholarship to go to law school. You know, I had this one, like, I'm sorry, I don't know if you allow cussing on your show, but I'll just say I have this one asshole, if you need to bleep that out, when I finished my 4th degree, I have 2 bachelors and 2 masters. I posted something on social media, just giving myself a pat on the back, proud of myself. I finished my 4th and final degree, not doing anything else after this. And this white guy who I don't know hit me up to berate me about bragging and being pretentious and all this other shit. And I'm like, excuse me? How many white people have you said this to? He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, how many white people on social media have their degrees or have just acquired their degrees in something or put something successful? Did you hit up and tell them that they were being pretentious and they were being snobbish? And he was like, well, no, that's not the point. I'm like, that's exactly the point. Because you can't stand for a Black man to have successes because you were told this story that Black people are poor and from the ghetto. And then you find a Black person who not only is not poor, didn't grow up in a ghetto, but is also educated and has 4 degrees. You feel like crap because you feel like your life is probably may not be on the level of mine. So now you're trying to tear me down to make yourself feel better, but you can't. Because at the end of the day, I come from a successful family. I come from an educated family. I come from a nice neighborhood, nice area, and I have 4 degrees. And regardless of what you feel about me, I'll still have all that, and you'll still be bitter. And he obviously blocked me on social media, but it was just pointing out, like, why be mad at someone? Why don't you just go out and do the work? Don't be mad about my education. Go get an education yourself. And I know that's kind of a little off topic, but all of that kind of goes in hand with the theater question you asked. Why we need to normalize Black writers, Black artists in the theater and in film as well. Why are groups like EAG important? I believe EAG is important because I believe anyone who is avidly trying to break down barriers is important. I do capoeira, and one of the instructors is a white lady, and something very touching that she said the other day was, and she probably doesn't realize she said it, but she was talking about the election and Kamala, and also talking about equality for minorities and Black Lives Matter and all of that. And she said, I've been following Black Lives Matter religiously because I'm trying to figure out what I can do to help Black people, like what I can do to aid to this movement, what I can do, what part can I play in helping Black people achieve their goals of equality? And that was very powerful because most people don't say that. Most people are like, oh, that's their thing. I don't have anything to do with that. Or they just want this and they want that. And so I feel like anyone who's reaching out or trying to be the change that you wish to see is, should be commended. And I think the Episcopal Actors Guild, for them to even create an event called Black Voices, is them wanting to be that change and wanting to show that there are Black voices out there. And it's a charity event. It's pay what you will. And the money that they make, they're using it to supplement actors' needs, because in this pandemic, a lot of actors have a lot of needs. So I think just the overall philanthropy of this organization is special, because you don't see that often. So I think that's why that's what's beautiful and unique about them. Hi, my name is Christopher Raishun Marshall, and if you enjoyed this conversation about my play Little Black Bear and also the Black Voices event by the Episcopal Actors Guild, come and attend. And if you want to learn more about me, go to my website, www.christophermarshall.net.